Okay. All right. There he is. The legal. It's time for some Eric Segall in my life. He is here today to talk, of course, about a new NBA season just getting underway.
Yes, watch out for the Hawks, people, and the Knicks.
Watch out for the Hawks and Knicks. That's the full review, folks. And that is your NBA season preview. Watch out for the Hawks and Knicks. Thank you.
Rats. That's it.
He's a big sports fan, the Eagle. I'm a sports fan, but I don't like to talk about it. Yeah. I feel like you probably talk a lot of sports with like the other dads and people.
Well, for the record, I've also written about sports for the Huffington Post and for Dorf on Law several times. Someday I'm going to retire from this thing I do about the Supreme Court, and then we'll see, my friend.
Two outlets known for their sports beats.
I also wrote about Billy Joel once, Huffington Post. That was fun.
I sometimes like the controversies. I'm interested in the controversies and popular, kind of issues in sports, the economic issues, the gender issues, and all of that. I do get interested in that. And there's some big controversy about the WNBA, which I have no idea.
Yeah, it's a great thing. But I will say we're going to get to sports today because the Supreme Court is going to hear a big sports case. Turns out.
Well, I'm very happy to have you here to talk about the upcoming term. The Supreme Court is underway. They're ready to do a whole bunch of new damage.
Yeah.
By the way, just saw an article from a reputable, now I can't remember who it is, but something about how John Roberts will go down as, doing more damage to, I don't know what the terms were, but I think it was democracy than anyone ever.
Well, it's the Roberts Court that turned money into speech. Before then, there were some limits on what legislatures could do to regulate campaign finance. But it's the Roberts Court specifically, and this term also, they have a case that's just maybe a killer. We'll get to it. But the traditional rule has been that if a super PAC or a PAC is going to make expenditures, it can't do it in concert with a candidate above a certain limit. That case is before the court, and they're going to probably say that candidates can work with their super PACs to spend money in unlimited amounts. It's going to just make everything worse.
Unbelievable. Well, yeah. I guess
that's how you and I met, was campaign finance reform.
Citizens United?
Pretty much. Yeah. Well, the first time we met was about race, but the second time you called me and said, let's talk about Citizens United. Yeah. Did I shock you with that one?
No. What? They're probably.
You paused for a long time.
I don't know what just happened, but go ahead.
Okay. No, I'm not saying that the first time we talked was about Senator Trent Lott making racist statements.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And the second time we talked about campaign finance.
All the way back over a decade ago when I was live on SiriusXM, and now we're live on a number of other platforms, and I'm very happy to have you here. I mean, we're going to talk about we're going to do a lightning round, getting your quick take on many of the big blockbuster cases that this court is going to hear. I guess we start with today in this conversion therapy case.
Sure. The overall theme for the course is R&R, and that's not rest and relaxation. It is religion and Republicans. Religion and Republicans always win. That's the theme.
Religion and Republicans always what? You fade out sometimes.
Religion and Republicans always win. How is that better? I move the microphone closer to my mouth.
It's the more that your voice goes down sometimes when you're making a point. It's weird that you do that because you're so seasoned. But sometimes you'll make this great point. The very last word I lose. But it's.
Are you sure it's not your ears?
Maybe it's my ears, but I think I'm almost positive it's your face. So anyway.
Yes.
This is religion and
Republican. So today was religion. A Christian therapist in Colorado is challenged a Colorado law that bans conversion therapy, which, as your audience knows, is when people try to make gay people straight, basically. And
it's torture. It's and the experts, scientists, psychologists say that it's ineffective and it's in fact abuse.
Well, this is actually, Pete, a hard issue. It's just not a hard case. Telling therapists what they can and cannot say to their patients does absolutely implicate free speech concerns. I'm not saying it doesn't. And the question is it a medical procedure or is it free speech? But what I want to just tell your audience, the Supreme Court obviously is going to rule that this Colorado statute is unconstitutional because they want to do as much damage to LGBTQ people as possible. They shouldn't hear this case today. This is another case in a long line of cases brought by an organization called the Alliance Defending Freedom, which brought 303 Creative versus Alonis, which was the website person who wanted to create websites but never had and thought they might be prosecuted for not including same-sex couples, even though she didn't have a website. The court shouldn't have heard that case. This is the same group that brought a case challenging Missouri practice that had ended by the time the case got to the Supreme Court regarding religious schools, and the court shouldn't have heard that case. This woman today says in her pleadings she doesn't do conversion therapy. End of discussion. She has never been threatened with prosecution. Colorado has never prosecuted or fined or done anything to anybody under this law. And this is just a case made up by the Alliance Defending Freedom to do harm to LGBTQ folks. And Article 3 of the Constitution requires a case or controversy. And the Supreme Court has held over and over again that when you bring a case before you're arrested, before you're fined, before the government has come at you, you have to show a direct threat of enforcement. Otherwise, anybody could sue about any statute anytime. Just real quick on this, there's a famous case from the 1960s where Connecticut prohibited contraceptives. And women who couldn't get pregnant for very legitimate physical reasons brought a lawsuit saying we have to use contraceptives effectively to have intimacy because we can't get pregnant. It would be very disastrous. The court didn't hear that case because Connecticut wasn't enforcing the law. A couple years later, a doctor wanted to open a Planned Parenthood clinic. That's when Connecticut was going to enforce the law. That became Griswold versus Connecticut, the famous case that created the right to privacy. The idea is, unless the state sues you, you can't sue the state until they make some threat or they arrest somebody like you. Colorado's arrested nobody. This law has not been enforced. And she has said, I'm not using conversion therapy. So why are we debating whether conversion therapy can be prohibited? Anyway, the reason we're hearing it is because the Roberts Court hears all cases brought by ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, which is really Alliance Defending Religion. Their website says that their organization is dedicated to the traditional God view of marriage. And it's just one more in a string of cases brought by that group.
I think the one word you're missing there is Christianity. It's specifically Christian, the religion that they're protecting. They're not advocating for Islam or Jewish.
Well, every now and then, so there was a case in the 1990s involving beards and jails. I'm sorry, in the 2000s, where the court did protect a Muslim and facial hair. And it does do that every now and then, like every 10 years, to show they do that.
It's a Christian nationalist-led run organization with a Christian nationalist agenda.
You mean the Supreme Court? See, I can be funny at times.
Don't talk about it. Just let it be funny. It was funny, and then you ruined it. See, I'm smart. All right, Fredo.
Before we came on air, we were having a discussion of whether I was funny or not, and I said my wife thinks so. So why not? Anyway, go on. Sorry.
All right, that is the gay conversion therapy case that doesn't have any standing and shouldn't have been brought. But there's a lot more cases that are going to have a lot deeper effect. All respect to LGBT youth who are struggling. That is not most Americans. Most Americans will be affected by a lot of these other cases, and you can tick through them for us, including, we mentioned this voting rights case, this redistricting case. There's going to be a case, obviously, I think, brought about whether or not the National Guard can be ordered from one state to another state.
They haven't granted, so far they haven't said they're taking a case like that, but they're going to eventually. They're going to have to.
Yeah,
unless the Court of Appeals overturns the lower court decision in Portland, for example, which is all happening as really fast. I think eventually the court is going to wade into that issue, but that's not. They haven't decided to take that kind of case yet. I think one of the cases on everybody's mind is the tariffs case, right?
The tariffs case. Before you get to the tariffs case, you're going to talk about the cases they did grant cert, or they are going to hear arguments for. But one case they didn't is this case around Ghislaine Maxwell. What do you think of that, real quick?
I love the fact that when Donald Trump was asked about it, he was like, who? Never heard of her. which
What did
is
you think of that? I've asked that. I've had 4 guests today, and I think I've asked that at least to 3 of the 2 of them. What did you think of that? Because I don't think that he's as senile as a lot of other people think. I think he acts that way sometimes, and I think that woman lives in his brain more than any other person because she knows stuff. I think he's thinking about her all the time. So I think that was fake.
It was just a few months ago, or maybe weeks. I'm sorry, it's all blending together. His Department of Justice brought her in for an interview, and then she got transferred to a minimum security jail. There's no chance, 0 chance, no chance that happened without Donald Trump's knowledge. No chance. 0 chance.
Yeah, of course not. Todd Blanchard, he didn't bring her in. They went to her. Let's be clear.
yeah, fair enough. Good correction.
All right, let's get to this tariffs case. Yeah. What's this about? Whether or not...
Well, the point I want to make about this case is that's going to put the Roberts Court to the test, which of course they're going to fail. But for the last 5 years, you and I, almost every term, almost every year, talk about this created fantasy idea of the major questions doctrine, which is a brand new thing the Roberts Court invented a few years ago. And what it means is when Congress delegates power to the president on a major question, whatever that means, and no one knows what that means, but whatever it means, it has to do so with great specificity. The idea being, if it's a major question, then Congress should decide it, not the executive branch of the United States. Well, obviously, and the law Trump is using to put tariffs on everybody haphazardly and with no, common sense, is a law that only applies to economic emergencies, international economic emergencies. It's called IEPA. Don't ask me what it stands for, but it's basically international emergencies. So he's using that law to put these tariffs on, these products. And if there's ever been a major question, I don't believe in this doctrine, Pete, but if there's ever a major question, whether to put, huge tariffs on China and other countries would certainly be one of them. So if the Roberts Court really believed in this doctrine, they would strike down what Donald Trump has done. The problem is everything the Roberts Court believes in is trumped by their fondness for the Republican Party. So what they will do is decide, does it help or hurt the Republican Party to uphold these tariffs or not? Now, they may decide that upholding these tariffs hurts the Republican Party. They really might. But that's going to be what they go through, not any legal analysis or anything. Because if they're consistent, they would strike this down. So
cynical. I mean, so true.
Yes. Yeah. So can I say one general thing, Pete? I'm writing an article, a small essay now about all Supreme Court eras have dominant personalities. From 1900 to 1936, the court struck down 200 laws relating to minimum wages, overtime rules, labor conditions. It was a free market capitalism court, and that was its personality. The Warren's Court personality was defense of, to some degree, defense of criminal defendants, getting criminal defendants' rights. That was a big part of it. And of course, freedom of speech and abortion. That was the Warren Burger Court personality. The Kennedy Court was states' rights. I'm sorry, I call it the Kennedy Court. The Rehnquist Court was states' rights. The Roberts Court's personality is protect the Republican Party. So the tariff case will come down to that, pure and simple. And I'm not enough of an economist to tell you how they're going to deal with that. I would think a lot of Republicans hate these tariffs, right?
All of them.
Okay.
All of them.
Yeah.
Almost, it's against their orthodoxy, and it's bad for their constituents, especially, I was going to say especially farmers almost across the board, but I mean, we could go a lot further. There are some, obviously, industries and companies individually that will benefit from it. For the vast majority of people, I mean, of their constituents everybody's paying more as a result of this policy. Right. This, I mean, it's preposterous. It's going to make us weaker. I can't imagine that any Republican is really supportive of the policy. Certainly.
So that might lead the court to strike it down, but again, I want to emphasize that's a question of politics, not law. So another set of cases that they've granted cert on that are really big, and this goes, Pete, to how America operates as a country, is that starting around the New Deal, the court allowed FDR to create what are called independent agencies. The Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, those kinds of, these are not like HUD and HHS are executive agencies. And the president gets to pick the head of those agencies, confirmed by the Senate, and then fire them at will. And that's the right decision. The head of HHS the president needs to fire the head of his executive agencies for any reason, whenever he wants, because they're his agencies. But these independent agencies are different. They are insulated from presidential control, usually by having a for-cause requirement if you want to fire the head of the agency. And in 1930-something, in a case called Humphrey's Executor, the Supreme Court upheld the idea that the Federal Trade Commissioners could only be fired if the president found good cause. That's been a precedent on the books since the 1930s. And several cases involving that idea are before the court. Now, what's happened in the last few months, which is disgraceful, is Trump has tried to fire these people without good cause.
Right.
Lower courts have struck that down. They've said that's illegal. And in a few of those instances, the government took a direct emergency appeal, which the court should have denied. But the court stopped the lower courts from preventing Donald Trump from firing these people. That's been a consistent pattern with one exception, Lisa Cook of the Federal Reserve. And in a case where the court basically, these have all been shadow docket or emergency docket cases, however you want to talk about that. In all of these cases, the court has said the president gets to fire them while the litigation is going on, which is a weird thing. They're fired illegally, but they don't have their jobs, which is very strange, with the exception of the Federal Reserve. So I don't know a lot about the Federal Reserve, Pete, compared to economists and everything. But what I'm told, so this is not Segall talking, this is what I've been told, is that if the Federal Reserve gets under the control of the president, the stock market will tank and the economy will be. Is that what you've heard about this?
I mean, well, the stock market would tank as a result of the dollar, which is already weakened by about 10%, having that much less faith in it. I mean, the idea that the Fed would be controlled by political forces in the executive branch is unprecedented, and it's obvious what would happen, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. That's why it's supposed to be not political. And I mean, every economist, every capitalist, every investor, every financial expert I've heard and read says the same thing, which begs the question, well,
there's a big but there, though.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of legal, constitutionally principled difference between Congress saying you can only fire the Federal Trade Commissioners for good cause, but so that's now the president can fire them any reason, but we're going to make the Federal Reserve an exception to that rule? And no, there is no principled legal exception to that. So if they do that, it is solely a pragmatic kind of way to protect their investments. I don't know. I mean, it's crazy. And this Humphrey's Executor case is boring to people. And I know we get lost in the alphabet soup of FTC and FCC and all of that. But the reality is, Pete, that this country needs semi-independent agencies to inspect to do important things. And that's why Congress did this right after the Great Depression, partly to stop another Great Depression. And there are legitimate arguments that the Constitution as written doesn't call for these kind of independent agencies, but we've had a century of having them. Go ahead.
Coincides with yesterday, I think's episode of the New York Times Daily, which covered Russ Vought and what he wants to do at OMB. And he basically, in his own words, talks about these independent agencies as being unconstitutional, and he wants to destroy many of them. These independent agencies are vital to maintaining stability between one administration to another. But as we know, this administration is taking over everything in either control, alt, deleting, defunding, or if they like it, just staffing it with sycophants. And, the woman apparently that's in charge now of election security was an election denier.
Well, the woman in charge of the Department of Education was the Worldwide Wrestling
Now
executive.
don't you dare attack the great Linda
Linda
McMahon.
And we should actually talk about that, Pete, for a second, if
Okay.
you don't mind.
Go
This is
ahead.
not about the Supreme Court, but my friend Erwin Chemerinsky, who many of your
Drink.
recognize. Sorry?
I just have to drinking Chemerinsky and
and Posner. Yeah.
Posner.
Erwin is one of the great law professors of our time. He's dean of Berkeley. And literally within hours after the announcement, so Donald Trump, or the Department of Education, asked 9 universities, including Brown and University of Texas and others, to sign a document that would give control of those universities effectively to the federal government. It would take away all federal funding if these universities didn't agree to do certain things. And one of the things they had to agree not to do is, quote, belittle conservatism, whatever that means. You can't belittle conservatism. I belittle conservatism many, many days of the week. My university, if we weren't targeted, but if this eventually goes to all universities, my university could lose all federal funding based on my behavior. A University of Virginia professor wrote a great piece in the New Republic saying the article she's writing today would deprive University of Virginia, one of the universities, of all federal money and be fined and all that stuff. This is a complete threat to the United States of America. And Erwin wrote a piece in the New York Times within hours of this saying all 9 of these universities must collectively say no and emphatically say no. Because if even one says yes, it is a disaster. I cannot tell you how dangerous this is, Pete. Hopefully, we won't have to talk about it again, because hopefully it'll go away. But this is really terrible stuff. And I hope that presidents of all those universities are talking to each other. And I hope they all come up with a unified statement saying, hell no, hell no, hell no, because it's really terrible. Anyway, anything you want to ask me about that? Because I'm not crying wolf here. This is the biggest threat to education in the history of the United States.
What would it look like if it went?
So if a single university signs it, then of course the Trump administration will leverage that to go after other universities.
Right.
But if the Trump administration decides, you know what, whether you sign it or not, this is how we're going to interpret federal funding. And if you belittle conservatism, you don't get any federal funding and things like that. It's much worse than that. It's very detailed. Every university in America receives federal funding, except maybe the very religious ones, the evangelicals. But every other one does. And I don't think Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Chicago, Columbia, Duke, Penn, much less SUNY New York, Georgia State, University of California, 15 different cities. They need federal funds for their research, Pete. And I'm not talking about law schools. Law schools don't need federal money. We do our, but laboratories and scientists and epidemiologists and Johns Hopkins people who are, investigating how to cure cancer. This all comes, for better or for worse, from federal grants. And this administration wants to make those grants conditioned on these people abiding by the priorities of and the politics of the Trump administration.
Yeah.
It is a threat to everything we hold near and dear in America.
We've got a few more big cases that we want to get through. And if anybody has any questions in the live chat, you can ask them. Most people will be listening to this on the podcast. But we mentioned tariffs. We talked about the independent agencies. We talked about the case that was argued, I guess, was it today?
Yes. How about transgender? There's a big transgender case coming.
Yeah, I mean.
No, Pete, I think so. So I understand.
The issue, it's just like every time I hear it, I'm of two minds. One, defend transgender Americans at all costs. And two, how many transgender people are there? How many people get affected? This one has to do with transgender people, I think women wanting to play sports. And it's just like, when we talk about these Supreme Court cases and when we talk about all the big important issues I've been talking about every day for over a decade here on the show, I generally pick the ones that are going to affect the most people, that are the most serious. And it's just like, this is such a red herring because it's such a small amount of people, like in the single digits in terms of sports, but it still needs to be discussed. So I err on the side of discussing it. The Supreme Court is going to hear it. Go ahead.
Well, let me make it. So I think your point's valid. And I think especially for non-legal audiences, I think it's important to talk about the cases that affect all of us or most of us. I think your priorities there, I've always thought your priorities there are valid. The reason I think maybe that general rule doesn't apply here, Pete, is because this is, again, a religiously inspired attack on others. It's an attack on others. And the fact the court is even willing to hear it, because you're right, it doesn't affect that many people, shows you what this court's priority is, because there are a lot of important cases out there they're not hearing. I'm not saying it's not important. No one, and neither are you. No one is interpreting that. But the Supreme Court only hears 75 cases a year. So these days. So the question is, why this one? And the reason it's important to me is because anything that attacks the other these days, meaning non-white Christians, non-white males, is something the court is interested in. And I don't think, by the way, I don't think it's an easy case. I'm not saying it is. I have mixed feelings about the issue on the merits of transgender athletes playing women's sports in some sports. So I've had a lot of talk about this with my very politically correct daughters, and we've really gone about this. And I think my daughter, Sarah, who is 17, is all law all the time, has given me the correct answer to this problem as a general proposition, which is you can't have one rule. One rule doesn't work for this kind of stuff. Pete, I don't think a 6'8" person who identifies as female but was at birth born with male genitalia,
Transgender woman,
a transgender woman, I don't think a 6'8", 250-pound person like that should play high school basketball against other women. I don't. I think that's, or at least I think it's a hard call.
I think Sarah's answer on this is the smartest one I've heard.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. There isn't one answer. There are specific situations. We can be pretty thoughtful about it. And
yes, but the court won't be. That's the problem. The court won't be. And so West Virginia has a global law barring all transgender women from playing men's sports. And that's, for example, golf. Although men do hit the ball farther in golf, I don't know if strength is such a key. There are very small golfers who hit the ball as far as really big golfers. I don't know the science behind that. But there are some sports where maybe the rule should be transgender females should be able to play. Chess would be one of them.
It's not a sport, but that's not a sport.
Well, it's a game.
Yeah. Come on. Okay. I mean, there are plenty of other sports and games you can think of, for example, that wouldn't be the case in, I think. But it's just the idea that a transgender girl wants to play sports to begin with. I want to have a sit down with this person and be like, listen, what are we doing here? Like, why are we doing this? Like, what do you hope to achieve? You're going to bring a lot of, and I just think
Pete, it depends. If that transgender girl is 5'4" and 140 pounds playing, contact sport, that's a different situation than if they're 6'9". Because the reality is, I hope I don't get in trouble for this. There are, you take the average NCAA offensive lineman, and they're like 290, 6'2".
Yeah,
I'm sure there may be one or two women in the world who could do that. But there aren't many, not yet anyway. There aren't many.
Well, there's no transgender woman playing football because there's no women's football team. So,
well, no, I'm just saying I just think it has to be a local.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. And I can't believe we spent so much time on it. I mean, in my town, there was a transgender girl on the volleyball team in my town. It made national news. She didn't even make the starting lineup. But the concern was that she was going to hit the ball too hard. You can't hit the ball too hard.
Right.
You can't. In volleyball, I'm sorry that the men don't hit the ball so much harder. And this transgender girl's so good, but anyway, let's
move on because there is a huge voting rights case, and it's a case that came from last term. It's a really complicated case involving Louisiana and the creation of what we call two majority minority districts, meaning two districts where the seat is relatively safe for in Louisiana's case. For a black person to win. And Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is a statute, not the Constitution, a federal statute, suggests this is something Louisiana had to do. The argument is it is unconstitutional to take race into account in any way in redistricting. And The Voting Rights Act, which can't be inconsistent with the Constitution, does suggest that race has to be taken into account in places, Louisiana, where race was taken into account for 150 years, to keep black people out of office. And the Supreme Court is going to hold that redistricting can't take into account of race. It's going to end the Voting Rights Act this term. It's going to end the process it began with Shelby County versus Holder in 2013. You and I have talked about Shelby County so often. And this is incredibly painful to me, both because I love my country, because my wife has a close relationship with the John Lewis family, because John Lewis was a fearless advocate for voting rights and the Voting Rights Act, because Atlanta, Georgia is the cradle of the civil rights movement. And without Atlanta, Georgia's people like Andrew Young and others, not to mention John Lewis, who was my representative, the Voting Rights Act would never have been passed to begin with. And the Supreme Court's going to end it. And it is almost too painful to talk about, Pete, because you can't be in a country where black people are excluded from the political process for almost all of our country's history, and then try to repair that damage without taking into account race. And that's why the Voting Rights Act was passed the way it was. And Republican Justice Blackmun once said in an affirmative action case, the only way to get past race is to use it. There's no other way in this country. And the Roberts Court, as you know, a few years ago held that university admissions have to be colorblind, and they're going to rule that redistricting has to be colorblind. And that's going to overturn 45 years of precedent as well. And so they're not following their own decisions. They're making up principles that don't exist. The United States Constitution says nothing about affirmative action or using race for the purposes of redressing longstanding racism. It says nothing about that. And these alleged and fake textualists are going to pretend that it does. And it's almost more than I can bear, to be honest. How's that?
That's good. That's real good. I feel like you might have wanted to mention, or maybe you didn't have it on your list, this birthright citizenship case. The
court hasn't granted cert yet in that.
Trump versus state of Washington.
So every court that has heard the birthright citizenship controversy has held that the executive order that Trump issued is unconstitutional. This is the one place where I think the Roberts Court, this and tariffs are the two places where I think the Roberts Court might look at themselves in the mirror and say, if we change a century's worth of precedent on birthright, more than that, on birthright citizenship, and we allowed this administration to change what everybody always assumed was the rule, was that if you're born in America, unless your parent is an ambassador or your parent is an invader, or a couple of Native American tribes who have their own governments, unless you're in one of those three exceptions, you're born here, you're a citizen here, doesn't matter what your parents are. I think their regard for themselves through the annals of history will likely lead them to do the right thing in that case. But I have to say, the Trump immunity case fooled everybody. Fooled conservatives, right, fooled liberals, right, fooled moderates. This may be one of those, but if I had to predict, I would say birthright citizenship will remain. But I may be naive. I don't think I'm usually naive, but I may be here.
Well, they haven't granted. They haven't agreed to hear it yet. They haven't granted cert yet, so that's not necessarily on the agenda.
In a good world, every court of appeals will rule against the order, and the court will just deny cert, and then we're done.
So, what else do we have left then? Potential National Guard.
I think the potentially biggest case left out. Well, there's also the independent expenditure campaign finance case that we talked about briefly. That could end up being a really big case as well. Right now, there are limits on the cooperation between super PACs and candidates. Now, of course, that's a blink situation. Of course, we know that super PACs cooperate with the candidates they support, but at least it has to be kind of subtle and hidden, and it can't be direct. I think they're going to say it can be direct, and that's going to end all campaign finance reform except for direct donations. But we won't need direct donations if you can coordinate your expenditures with the candidate. That's a big case. But the biggest, but I agree with you that whether Donald Trump can use federal troops or federalized state National Guard troops to militarize American cities could end up being the biggest issue of the term, because what he is on the way to doing, I think, is declaring martial law. And if they let him do that, I think it'll embolden him. I think it will inspire. Actually, it's not even him. Pete, I honestly believe this is Steve Miller. I honestly don't believe
you're not alone in that. A lot of people think that he is the one giving a lot of the directives and orders, and a lot of people are saying that this is all about the next election and declaring martial law and preventing from being election. And I think that, the governor of California is saying that. I think the governor of Illinois said it. Joy Behar said it on The View.
Joy
So
Behar.
that's all you need to know.
Yeah. No, what? Well, if you heard his speech at the Charlie Kirk funeral, I can only stomach some of it. He called the opposition, said, "You are nothing. You do nothing. You will be nothing." That's basically what Steve Miller said. That has the potential to be a really bet your country case. I think the Trump immunity case was to some degree a bet your country case.
Yeah.
And this one may be the same, but so far it's all in the lower courts, and who knows what's going to happen. Pete, I have a very smart friend who thinks that this immigration stuff after starting next January is going to get much less terrible. And he has a lot of complicated reasons for this. I'm not an expert.
Immigration stuff, meaning the snatch and grabs, the secret police, deportation.
The ICE presence for the alleged purpose of cracking down on illegal immigration. He thinks that this is going to slow the economy so tremendously and scare so many people and employers that eventually this issue will calm down. I'm not saying he's right or wrong. I don't think he's obviously wrong. And I do think it's coming from Miller, not Trump. So I think Trump's big thing is tariffs.
If you think, I don't know who this person is, but if you think that cruelty is the point and it's what motivates people, it's not policy, it's about winning and pounding your enemy and drinking liberal tears, then why would you want to stop what is creating more of an issue for most Americans watching these images? Then why would you stop that?
Well, first of all, I don't actually think the presence of what Trump is doing in Portland and Chicago and Memphis, Tennessee's a red state, and all these other places, I actually think immigration's only part of it. I think the bigger plan is to have his people there for the midterm elections, already stationed there to intimidate people at the polls.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of why wouldn't that be, even if that wasn't the stated agenda, if it wasn't written down somewhere, it would seem to be a pretty logical conclusion.
Yeah, it's not the stated agenda, Pete, because I think the economy, again, I'm talking out of my expertise. I admit it.
Go ahead.
The economy is going to tank without, this, you've said this before, without people, undocumented immigrants working.
A lot of businesses are going to close or suffer. For sure. And they already have. And that's going to get worse. Yeah. And as the midterm elections approach, the president's, or in this case, the Republican Party, is going to want a good, robust, thriving economy. I'm speaking out of my, what's the expression? Yeah.
Out of my skis here, but let me just say this. I think the war on tariffs is personal to Trump. I don't think not the war on tariffs, the use of tariffs.
Yeah.
I don't think this is the same thing to him. I think this is a Steve Miller enterprise. And if economists in the Republican Party make strong cases against it, come January, February, March, as the midterms. Anyway, Pete, I'm grasping straws here because there's nothing good to report. So I'm trying not to totally doom and gloom.
Well, no, that's fine. That's fine. Anything else left on the agenda that you wanted to mention as big cases that the court's going to take or hear?
Nothing other than I want to leave your audience with this thought. The court generally tends to do these incredibly extreme things in non-presidential election years, and even sometimes in non-midterm years. This is a non-midterm year. The beginning of it is. But come February and March of 2026, I think the court might start looking at the election returns. And just like they did in 2024, they actually ruled against a gun statute in 2024. They actually dismissed an abortion challenge in 2024. They did all of that because they were looking at the election returns. So maybe this term won't be as terrible as we think if the justices decide that will hurt the Republican Party at the polls. And that's because the overall theme of everything in this court is help the Republican Party.
Right.
So we end where we began. I kind of like.
That's the final word.
Yep.
Cool. All right.
Thank you. And next time we talk NBA.
Next time it'll be nothing but NBA.
Yes.
Appreciate you stopping by as always very much. And we'll talk soon. And that's it, everybody. Thanks for watching live. The Legal Eagle, Eric Segall. You're an American treasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.